Okay. This is a nice crowd for. Hey, and Dr. Mulholland. Yeah, we got some VIPs, right? This is a nice crowd for such a blustery night. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Dr. Baxter. I run the Center for Beauty and Culture. The last Angelico Center for Beauty Culture event that we did a book launch for my Why Literature Still Matters down at Pace Bene about a month ago. But now that I think about it, so many people came, but I think it's probably because we just bought ice cream for everyone. We bought gelato for everyone. I thought people were coming for the literature. No, but that was a cool event for me, in part because for me the book came full circle. Doing Angelico events and the Center for Beauty and Culture over the past 2 years, I was able to kind of use Angelico Fellows as a laboratory to test some of the ideas. So it was sort of born here in Atchison and nourished by Angelico Fellows, and then to be able to launch it properly with Angelico Fellows was exciting to me. And since then, I've done a bunch of podcasts and lectures on different parts of the book, and the good news is that people are really responding to it. Maybe this is not bad news, but the interesting news is that by the time I'm done sort of talking about our need of beauty and literature, people are saying to me, okay, fine. It's a very kind of Nate Jones question, right? Okay, fine, I'm convinced, right? I think this matters. What's the next step, right? Where do we go from here? And that's why I'm so excited to have Renee Roden here tonight, because I think there are lots of next steps, right? If you've become convinced that beauty matters, maybe even become convinced that it doesn't just matter, but it urgently matters precisely because we live in this age of flattening. And so we need these, what I call these technologies of inwardness, right? In other words, literature and theater and the arts, but technologies of inwardness. Right? One of those technologies of inwardness is theater, and that's why I think I'm so excited to have Renee Roden with us here this evening. She's going to talk to us, I don't know if she would use this term, but of the therapeutic powers of theater, at least therapeutic in terms of what our culture needs in terms of depth and interiority. Miss Roden is a graduate of Columbia Journalism School, and she's also a double domer, if you know what that means, from the University of Notre Dame, from which she earned an undergraduate Bachelor of the Arts in Theater and Theology, with a minor in Catholic social thought. I feel like knowing that, you know 33% about how Renee's mind works and the things that she cares about. And also she has a graduate degree in theology from Notre Dame. Renee has taught theater for nearly 2 decades to preschool thespians, high school students, college students, and seminarians, and currently serves as a fellow and member of the vision team at Jesuit Media Lab, a ministry of the Society of Jesus, blending Ignatian spirituality with creative inquiry. Renee currently is also the managing editor of the CatholicWorker.org's newsletter, Roundtable, covering the international Catholic worker movement founded by servant of God Dorothy Day. She lives at St. Martin de Porres Catholic Worker in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and we're very glad to have her give this talk tonight, Theater as Sacramental, a meditation on saturated breath.
You do look, my son, in a moved sort, as if you were dismayed. Be cheerful, sir. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you all, were spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inhabit, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. Sir, I am vexed, bear with my weakness, my old brain is troubled. Be not disturbed with my infirmity, if you be pleased, retire into my cell, and there repose. A turn or two I'll walk, to still my beating mind. Thus speaks Prospero in the 4th act of The Tempest, after he has presented his play within a play to the young betrothed lovers, his daughter Miranda, and the shipwrecked Ferdinand. Prospero assures Ferdinand in this speech, as many characters are so assured throughout Shakespeare's play, that the visions, the actors, the spirits they see are just that, simply air. Spirits made of nothing more substantial than breath. Your swords may as well wound the loud winds, as Ariel says. Breath is an important element of theater. It is perhaps its essential element. And if this is the case, then something about theater is undeniably connected to life itself. So if we are to speak tonight, if I am to speak tonight, thank you, Dr. Baxter, for that lovely introduction. If I am to speak tonight, if we are to talk tonight about theater as something approaching sacrament, we must begin with breath. The Hebrew scripture scholars can correct me on my horrible Hebrew pronunciation, but ruach, the breath of God, is what is breathed over the chaos of the universe in Genesis 1:2 to bring creation into being, the beginning of the entire cosmic drama. The breath of God goes forth, and thus, with an exhale, history is born. Breath keeps us living since. Humans take on average 200,000 breaths a day during an average human lifespan of roughly, and there's no averages with humans, 28,000 days. God, the author of our days, gives us no choice but to breathe in and breathe out. We don't stop our breath. Ironically, we spend a lot of time, and we talk about this a lot in theater, we spend a lot of time not breathing or not fully breathing in our day-to-day lives. We spend many of our waking hours in our anxious brains and in our eyeballs, staring at screens or scanning traffic on a road. We are a visual culture, caught in our eyes. In the interior castle, Teresa of Avila deemed self-awareness indispensable for a soul's striving for union with God, for the humility to forget herself and enter into union with the author of creation. We live in a world that distracts us. Bright screens stimulate us and alienate us from our own bodies and our embodied breath. Thus, the practice of theater, rather than beginning with an act of contrition and that self-awareness that our liturgy does, often begins with a recollection of our breath, as we did last night and as students will do in these workshops later tonight and tomorrow. We ground ourselves by just breathing. And so we're going to do this together. You thought you could come to a talk on theater and not do a participatory exercise? You thought wrong. So I invite you to just move back from the table a little bit, give yourself some breathing room. Don't worry, you don't have to talk to your neighbor or introduce yourself. As introverted Catholics, we'll keep to ourselves. So what I'm going to invite you to do is just close your eyes, make yourself comfortable, maybe roll your shoulders a bit. We're carrying heavy book bags and backpacks. We're carrying so much stress in our shoulders all day long. And just kind of move your head gently side to side, stretch out your neck. We also carry so much tension in our neck. And tension in our bodies, at least not speaking scientifically, speaking from the theater vision of the human person, that tension is just simply breath that's trapped, that's not being allowed to flow freely through our muscles. So I want you to just give yourself, maybe warm up your hands. It's been a cold, blustery, rainy fall day. Warm your hands up and then give yourself just a very gentle face massage. Maybe you spent the day reading books in low lighting, so your forehead has been tensed up. No one's ever done that in college. Maybe you've been tense. You have a lot of deadlines. You've been holding that in your jaw. Just kind of rub those face muscles all out. Don't worry about looking ridiculous because everyone's eyes are closed and no one can see you. Just let out a loud sigh. And another one. Let the giggles out. Just let them. It's all good. And I want you to put your hand on your lower stomach and just wiggle your toes on the floor. If they're in shoes, you can feel them kind of wiggle up and down. Take a deep breath in and out. And this time when you breathe in, I want you to imagine your breath traveling all the way down your legs to your toes, the soles of your feet touching the bottom of the floor. And breathe out. Breathe in. And sigh out. One more time. Breathe in. Feel your back expand against your chair as your lungs fill with air. And sigh out. You can open your eyes when you're ready, or you can keep them closed. That's fine too. And you don't have to say this out loud, but maybe just think in your head, maybe notice what feels different about your body now, or what feels different about your breathing after doing that. I always feel much more present, much more in tune with who I'm looking at and where I am. If only I did that every time after I picked up my smartphone. So, where were we? Theater is not mysticism, but it contains in its mysteries much of the similar dual thrust of the mystic's reality. Deeper within, higher above, into and among. It is an art that strives to knit a deeper intimacy both between ourself and ourselves, and between ourself and our neighbor. The mystic is not the one who exists in a simple vertical beam between herself and the divine. The mystic is the one who lives this mystery of the cruciform life, the horizontal and the vertical, God and neighbor, because God once became our neighbor. Theater, the Russian nesting doll layers of reality which we inhabit when we watch a play, draws our attention back to this mystery of life itself. Shakespeare constantly teases this fundamental synchronicity between theater and life. A play within a play is a reliable Shakespearean trope. Hamlet's players present the mousetrap to the king. The Midsummer Night's Dream band of actors perform the tragedy of Pyramus and Thisbe. And here in The Tempest, Prospero offers his soliloquy, the soliloquy I just shared, at the end of the wedding performance of Ceres and Juno to bless the betrothal of his beloved daughter Miranda. Shakespeare is fond of stacking play upon play like these Matryoshka dolls in his dramatic worlds. He is like a painter who mischievously points to the frame, who breaks the fourth wall to draw attention to the mannerly mirror his art holds up to life. Behold the proscenium, he says. What are we looking at when we look at a play? We come to see ourselves in a new way. We too are actors on a stage, Shakespeare is suggesting. Just as the actors in this play, the play that Prospero concocts, are all air, so we too are breath. A sacrament, as I'm sure we could all say by heart, having memorized the Baltimore Catechism as young children, is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. The Catechism of the Catholic Church calls sacraments efficacious signs by which divine life is dispensed to us. In other words, a sacrament is a visible, incarnate, sensory experience that ushers us into the life of God. Baptism remakes our identity into the Paschal mystery, the one true drama of the world. And we are given our one true role, Christ, the God-man who died and rose to new life. We are baptized into the mystical body of Christ, and we will never quite know our true character, the true part we have to play in the divine drama of salvation, unless we know ourselves by the name of our role, Jesus. Sacramentals are those signs that resemble sacraments, that point back to these efficacious signs that dispense the divine life into our human world. These sacramentals, I believe theater is like one of these, mold the shape of a physical reality into this sign that points us toward the divine, the mystery at the heart of our existence, that brings us closer to the supernatural order of God's creation, God's breath. So if we're talking about theology and theater, we often find ourselves talking about Hans Urs von Balthasar. Balthasar, the theologian and former Jesuit, was named a cardinal by John Paul II in 1988. He died shortly before he could be elected. But in the final act of his life, the 20 years spanning 1960 to his death, Balthasar published his systematic theological trilogy, his Theological Aesthetics, Dramatics, and the Theologic. His theodrama is a theological dramatic theory which spans 5 volumes that offer a Christology, eschatology, and soteriology through the lens of this theodrama, or the divine drama. There are a few essential outlines of Balthasar's ideas in these volumes, which I'm not going to go into in depth, but the basic ideas he touches on are the idea of the dramatic personae in the drama of the Trinity, that we, the baptized, the church, are the actors in the theodrama, and the idea that the saints are those who most perfectly act their role in the divine drama. In the theodrama, Balthasar draws frequently from the theatrical theory of Konstantin Stanislavski, who founded the Moscow Art Theater in 1898. At the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th, Konstantin Stanislavski ushered in a dramatic revolution with theatrical realism. A departure from the mannered patterns of 19th century melodrama, Stanislavski asked his actors to borrow Tolkien's phrase, sub-creators, to recreate the reality of a real human on stage, their movements, their conversation, their emotion, their psychological motivations and tactics. Stanislavski's method, the basis for what later became known as the method or method acting, was based on sensory memory, recalling emotional experiences and sensations to represent the truth. This method drew on this awareness of the self in order to recreate the self on the stage. I find Balthasar, and I'm not sure Balthasar scholars will agree with me, as a sort of Shakespearean character. He is an odd theologian, quirky, and a creator of his own genres. I see a simpatico between the histories, comedies, and tragedies of the First Folio and Balthasar's Trinitarian theological project at the end of his life. The theodrama remains an essential text for theologians seeking to connect the act and ritual of drama with the mystery of Christ and the role of our Christian witness. Balthasar's writing has provided a firm promontory from which other meditations on theater and theology have leapt. My own study of the theological and spiritual implications of theater began by reading Balthasar in conversation with my experience as a young actor and as a student in a theater conservatory in high school. The first time I felt God, I was playing Bernadette Subaru in a middle school play. I was 12 and playing Bernadette, the French peasant who received one of Europe's most popular Marian apparitions in 1858. The play was by a small homeschool thespians group performance of a very bad play called The Smallest of All. The production values were sparse. We had 1 weekend of performances. The stage was a linoleum-floored platform in a school gym. Certainly no grander a welcome mat for the supernatural than the mud of Massabielle. But I remember sitting on my bed after opening night, surrounded by quiet in my bedroom, kneeling on my flower-embroidered comforter, still dressed in the French peasant costume my mother had made me, and feeling a distinct something run through me. Some kind of ecstasy, spark, or inspiration. something divine. Acting, I think, is half delusion, deluding yourself into believing that you can leave yourself behind and channel another's spirit, a heady delusion that you can carry the same gifts they have inside yourself for an hour or three. But I also choose to believe that this sort of delusion is an essential element in the communion of saints. In some ways, this delusion is a revelation, revealing something you have in common with a spirit far greater, perhaps, than your own. So there I was, feeling God, after kneeling on the stage each night for the better part of a week, pretending to see a vision of a woman in a white dress who called herself the Immaculate Conception. After pretending to see a vision for a week and then feeling a vision in that moment, I came to believe that perhaps theater was a practice of something more than just pretend. Benedict XVI wrote in a 2002 address to Communion and Liberation, "True knowledge is being struck by the arrow of beauty that wounds man. Being struck and overcome by the beauty of Christ is a more real, more profound knowledge than a mere rational deduction." Liturgy is this ultimate aesthetic experience of being struck by the arrow of Christ the beautiful, rather than the comprehension with our rational mind. Liturgy can too often become a feat of oracular communion rather than the full-bore, in and out-of-body experience it is supposed to be. A five-sense enterprise. The perfume of incense, our voices raised together in song, our entire body standing, kneeling, hands raised or folded in prayer, giving thanks for the God of givenness, in community, doing all this in community. Theater also reminds us of something that we can so often forget. We are beings, full-bore, five-sense beings, and we are beings in communion. One method of theater which highlights this spiritual relationship in the communion of saints and our being in communion is called viewpoints. The viewpoints method of theater has its origins in the experimental Judson Church Theater in Washington Square Park in New York City. The group convened painters, filmmakers, composers, and dancers to find postmodern forms of artistic expression that were liberated from psychology, so from this sort of psychological realness that Stanislavski pioneered. One of their group, the choreographer Mary Overly, introduced these viewpoints to a theater director named Anne Bogart, who developed them for theatrical performance. While method acting interrogates a character's objectives, motives, and emotional state, viewpoint begins creative exploration through the physical environment and the reality of our bodies' interactions in and with space. Now, viewpoints are weird. They're very weird. I'm not going to deny that. But they're also amazing, and they're amazing to do in a group. The 9 viewpoints that most exercises use are spatial relationship, kinesthetic response, shape, gesture, repetition, architecture, tempo, duration, and topography. And really, viewpoints is a getting at truth from the outside in rather than a sort of Stanislavski. Starts with the inside out. Both, I think the goal is this sort of truthful expression of life on stage. Okay, so what do viewpoints look like? Let's all, just kidding. So often they begin with, we would all stand up. You can imagine this in your mind's eye, and we begin by walking around the space as we are sort of random atoms bouncing across the space. And the goal is this sort of atomic molecular goal of like, you are an atom and you're supposed to fill the empty space. You fill the void. And so that begins, you begin to see the viewpoints: spatial relationship, shape, repetition, tempo, duration. Already you begin to find this deepening awareness of your spatial relationship in the room. Where am I in space? Where am I not? What space is filled? What space is empty? Kinesthetic response is an impulsive movement drawing your body to that empty space. Don't think, just do. Could be a good summary of kinesthetic response. The goal of viewpoints is to ask your overly analytical brain to take a rest and let other forces in our bodies and minds take a front seat. Participants in several viewpoints exercises that I have facilitated have noted that even though they were pinging around randomly in space, there were remarkably few collisions between those participants pinging. One might conclude that our bodies have their own instincts, intuition, and wisdom that we might not always be drawing on, but can allow us to work together with our fellow performers, our fellow humans, in fresh, surprising ways. When you're doing viewpoints, walkers are often invited to begin a new task, to find windows and doors, that is, gaps between two other walkers, and run through them. They were asked to follow someone secretly and to make an equilateral triangle with themselves and two other walkers. At a certain point, all of these goals begin to be self-conflicting. You can't secretly follow someone and then try to make an equilateral triangle with them and someone else. It just eventually doesn't work. These exercises are silly and pointless, and that's part of the exercise. Failure is part of the goal. The goal is to try and not necessarily to succeed, if you can wrap your minds around that. The goal is for an impossible task to awaken some other secret part of your brain, that will not stand to attention if called on directly. I think of this when Shakespeare highlights folly throughout his plays. There's a dramatic tension in a folly that reveals a deeper wisdom, a wisdom that is gained from leaving behind the world of rationality, of logic, and moving into a different mode of comprehension. This is often the task of theatrical exploration, to distract our task-oriented Y follows X brain, to not let the left hemisphere know what the right is doing. Often actors find that something like magic ensues, but I would call this, borrowing Jean-Luc Marion's phrase, a saturated phenomenon, an experience of the full phenomena of our own humanity, which we but scratch the surface of in our daily lives. We are such stuff that dreams are made of, and there is more to us than is dreamt of in our philosophies. As Dr. Baxter stated in the introduction, I live at a Catholic worker house of hospitality. A tragicomic place indeed. You may wonder how the Catholic worker element fits into theater, if it does at all. Dorothy Day and Peter Morin, the founders of the Catholic worker, believed that the philosophy necessary to reconstruct the social order, as Pope Pius XI had called all Catholics to do in his 1931 encyclical, was personalism. Personalism was a philosophy developed by Emmanuel Mounier in interwar France. Mounier's book, A Personalist Manifesto, was published in English at the behest of Peter Morin in 1938. Dorothy Day defined personalism in her 1939 autobiography, House of Hospitality, as to live a life in which people do not do things by compulsion, but of their own free will. The fundamental principle of personalism, Day wrote several years later, is the liberty of Christ, example rather than coercion, love rather than hate, the folly of the cross, serving rather than being served, taking the last place. Personalism, in a theodramatic context, is an embrace of our role in the drama. It is taking responsibility for our own agency as moral actors, as actors with a divine vocation, a disponibilité, or availability, to the Spirit, and the mandate to take action on the stage. Sometimes we may be tempted to wait for other greater saints, for better heroes than us, for the saints, the experts in the theodrama, to take care of problems. But in the words of author Annie Dillard, there is no one here but us chickens. There never has been. We chicken-footed souls are the hands and feet of Christ in this world. Personalism is Morin's response to this, writes Colin Miller, author of We Are Only Saved Together. It's a call for a Christianity that puts people first and asks about the consequences later, for a church with a do-it-yourself laity that at the same time clings resolutely to its clergy, the teachings, and the sacraments. In the October 1936 edition of the Catholic Worker, the editors defined personalism via a sermon of St. John Chrysostom. Chrysostom says, the Samaritan, the good one, the good Samaritan, did not say, "Where now are the priests? Where are the Pharisees? Where are the doctors of the law?" But as though he had come across a very great bargain, he grasped the opportunity for making profit. Therefore, when you see someone in need, body or soul, don't say to yourself, "Why didn't so-and-so take care of him?" But you attend him. And do not go into the reasons for the negligence of others. If you found gold lying, I love Chrysostom. If you found gold lying on the road, would you say to yourself, "Why didn't someone pick this up?" Wouldn't you rather hurry to get it before the next person? Likewise, then, pay attention to your fallen brother and think that you have found a treasure, the chance of caring for others. At our house of hospitality, we open our doors and find peoples whose problems we would like to explain away, to find some golden thread of reason for why them, why me, and not me, why someone else should help them and not me. We meet people enslaved in various forms, many people who have been brought into their position through no fault of their own, or whose stars or genes or family situations have been stacked against them from before their birth. So often, we sometimes think of God as a cosmic dispenser of morality tests. But if you spend any time with someone trying to get housing, hold on to housing, raise a child as a single parent, fight for some respect for themselves in a system that punishes the poor for their poverty, you soon come to know that the deepest truth of God is that God loves us, and our very existence is a testament to God's love for us. And if God loved us into being, then our very existence is the reason for our great dignity, a core tenet of personalism. How often that dignity is ignored, trampled on, and denied. And the deepest truth of God, then, is God is the one who seeks to heal those who've been trampled from these unbearable sins against their dignity, against God's own dignity, which is always assaulted when God's poor are mocked. Just yesterday, our friend and fellow parishioner Omar was taken into ICE custody. Omar is a legal resident here in the United States with a work permit, supporting his young son and wife who runs our parish soup kitchen. On Sunday, the day before Omar was taken into custody, he and his wife led the procession of Señor de los Milagros, the Lord of the Miracles, a devotion beloved by Peruvians, similar to the Guadalupe, venerating an image of Christ crucified that was painted by a slave and began to be honored by an Angolan immigrant community in Peru after it survived an earthquake in 1655, perfectly intact. Pope Leo XIV recently blessed an image that pilgrims brought to the Vatican. Omar and his wife Laura have been working for months to organize our parish into a small procession around our neighborhood, a tiny simulacrum of the procession that boasts millions of Catholics in Lima each October. After a day of such joy, of a public dramatization, this performance of faith, Omar was taken away from his family, who now have to support themselves, pay rent, car loans, all the bills that keep 67% of Americans working paycheck to paycheck, now on one salary from his wife's barely full-time job at the parish soup kitchen. We are all members, one of another, knowing that when the health of one member suffers, the health of the whole body is lowered, Dorothy Day wrote in 1940, and repeatedly throughout her life. Day believed that the mystical body of Christ was indeed the fundamental reality of our existence, and hospitality is a means of opening ourselves up to that mystery. In this way, this life of Catholic worker hospitality is like theater. It is a sacramental, a sign of the sacramental reality from which we are all shaped. Through hospitality, we practice drawing close to others' pain, and personalism impels us to take direct action to heal the pain. Through theater, we take up others' stories and enact them. Hospitality is real. Theater is a dream. But this dreaming, the exercise of our imaginations, is a necessary practice to expand our world from the sphere of self-concern to the theodrama, God's drama of salvation. Our imaginations shape the limits of what we believe is possible. Our imaginations, more so than our notional mind, map out the moral possibilities of our life. They tap into this well of saturated phenomena. The Tempest is one of Shakespeare's romances. A romance is that individual's search for transcendence outside of the collective polis. Shakespeare's romances have been appreciated by modernist critics for these modern themes. An individual leaves a fable-like polis of nondescript time and place and enters into a quest in nature for transcendence, the turn to experience. Shakespeare scholar Barbara Everett describes the romances or late plays sharing an interest in aesthetics over action and vision over plot. Shakespeare's late plays are cited as favorites since they retain the dark psychological depths of his finest tragedies, Lear, Hamlet, or Macbeth, and retain a periwinkle wash of tenderness that bleeds over his stage canvas. His characters find deep wells of forgiveness, grace, the bittersweet joys of reunion or restoration after a long, dark night. Time moves differently in the romances. It lingers. It wounds. It does not speed by in the rush as it does for the young, drinking fully of life. It unwinds slowly, and even when time's ills are mended, the long years of pain haunt each character's happy ending. It is time in the mode of those whose every third thought is of the grave, as Prospero says. It is the mystery of cross and resurrection. Even in this ontological leap of new life, the old wounds remain. Let us return to our sign instituted by Christ to give grace. Giving grace is something we do for the actors on stage. We politely, if instinctively, suspend our disbelief and in its stead give belief, give credence to the actors on stage. The more you practice theater, the more you exercise a belief in the givenness of things. Grace, like life or love, is one of those things you can't manufacture by yourself. You can't earn. You can't find it by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps or forcing it into being with entrepreneurial chutzpah. You won't find it by doing all the assigned homework, or filling out the correct paperwork. Grace depends on the grace of another. Grace, like life, like love, depends upon another to give it to you. Although we breathe 28,000 times a day, even our breath is not our own idea. Our first breath was not a given, and each one of the approximately 500 breaths we have each breathed since entering this room are a gift. The Tempest, some scholars attest, is the final play Shakespeare wrote without assistance, or the final manuscript that we have that was written in his entirely own hand and not with others. Some then have interpreted Prospero's final monologue, begging the audience to release me from my bands with the help of your good hands, as Shakespeare's farewell to the stage, his farewell to spirits to enforce, actors to move about the proscenium. He is leaving it all behind to contemplate his own fate in the mystery of death. And my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, he writes. A little applause, a little breath, he says, will release him from his vocation to writ life small on stage. We are at the mercy of reality, the atmosphere for oxygen, our fellow human beings, the God who put all of this into existence. We cannot face the mystery of our dependence alone. That is why Catholics go into a church at least once a week and practice together a collective profession of faith that the world is not ordered by our own invention. We are at the mercy of a love outside ourselves, but we have been invited into it. But it is not enough for us to practice the liturgy and hermetically seal it off from the moral imagination and practices of our daily lives. Sacramentals are those extensions of the life of the liturgy into the life of the world. They derive from our baptism into Christ's priesthood, our ability, our vocation, our role to bless all of reality. We practice this mystery of gift, this mystery of givenness in our daily lives, extending the liturgy's mystery into the world. Religion has often relied on drama to extend this truth into the world as well, to create dramatic spaces where we can enter the story. In the practice of telling a story together, in the art and ritual of theater, We are reminded of our dependence upon others. We need our scene partners. We need a script we often did not write. We need a director, an audience. We need their ears. These practices form us into persons who approach the world more in line with this mystery of givenness. Theater's techniques are not sacrament, but they prepare us for a sacramental reality. If viewed from and for the position of the theological, theater can be a spiritual ascesis, and a powerful one at that. Actors memorize lines. They try to bring to life the fullness of their character's interiority, their thoughts, their memories, their past, their motivations, their wants, their pains. We try to smell what they smell, be it sweet perfume or horse piss. We try to hear what they hear, Caliban's snuffling or Ariel's music. And we try to feel as they feel. We ask for the grace to enter into the experience, not of our own making. Actors rehearse for weeks, but at the end of the day, as they could tell you, we sit maddeningly waiting for lightning to strike. We create the conditions for the Spirit to move, for inspiration to arrive, for genius or brilliance or some utterance of the truly true thing to happen. We blame the audience for their lack of interest or attention if our performance is off. We blame our dinner, our distractions, not listening to our scene partner, flubbing our line, panicking, nerves, sweaty palms, if the genius does not arrive. But when that moment of inspiration comes, when you are saturated with the Spirit outside of yourself, for just the length of a short monologue, just the crucial moment of a pivotal scene, you are that mystic. The veil between the supernatural and this world is very thin. You are a portal through it. And in that moment, like all mystics, you know that this is a gift. You did not make whatever grace is given. You can only let it pour out of you because we have been invited into it. Despite the romantic quest for transcendence outside community, the polis, however, can never be left behind in the theatrical act. To create a piece of theater is to create the polis, to create community. The play is enacted by a community of actors, technicians, scene artists, lighting designers. It is performed for a community, and that communal grace extended to the actors gives the play its givenness, its grace. Or, as Prospero says in his closing prayer to the audience, its breath. Release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free. So we breathe together, and our brave new world is created. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Yeah.
We've got about 10 or 15 minutes for questions, if anyone has any. I can start us off. This is on. Can you hear this? Yeah. Renee, when you were telling us about the quirky viewpoints, and you jokingly acted for a brief moment that we were going to have to stand up and do them, I don't know about you guys, but I had this like chill of terror. Like, oh no. And I think that's such an interesting kind of symptom. Do you have any thoughts on why we like film, we like going to plays, we like watching other people act. Why would you say as a culture we're so terrified of being engaged in theater ourselves, or at least those sort of preliminary exercises which create the conditions in which we could do theater in an inspired way. What does that say about us that we're so afraid of this?
Um, that's a good question, and I'll have to think about it more. But off the top of my head, I would say that that's exactly the response that Viewpoints is designed to elicit, right? Like, I think we could say something about embodiment, right? And like the perhaps discomfort. But I think in terms of Viewpoints itself, it really is a praxis of failure, of like, you're supposed to be uncomfortable, you're supposed to be doing things that you have no idea how to do. And I don't know if maybe there exists this sort of perfectly fluid person who just shows up and is like, great, and like, but it's not designed for that person. It's designed for all of us who are achievement based, are afraid of change, are afraid of the unknown, of things we don't know how to do. And it is supposed to take us right where they are with that chill of terror of like, oh, the crazy lady is going to make me do weird things that everyone will think I look weird and funny because I don't know how to do them, or they're not what I usually do. And like, I think you'd have to, and it's supposed to take you right in that space and say, great, now we're going to make something together. We're going to sort of break you out of this shell and bring you back to this sort of more, I would say, not to be like natural state, not to be like Rousseau, but like some sort of like childlike existence of just sort of action and reaction. I would also ask you, like, what made you nervous? Was it just like the idea of having to stand up? Was it the idea of looking silly in front of other people? Was it just simply, oh, I'm going to have to move my body and I don't know how to do that? So I would say, if you felt terror at that statement, you're actually doing something right.
Good thing this will be her last invitation, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Nate, did you want to?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for coming. So you mentioned a little bit about personalism, and I loved how you connected it all in. Yeah. So just the idea of like gift of oneself, and connecting it to Dorothy Day, and her work, and then you said that we're at the mercy of reality, and how, like, to everybody else we are their reality, and that everybody else is the reality to us. So like, I guess what I'm getting at is, how do we live into that gift of ourselves and reception of gift of others into a better way, like every day? Like, just what are a couple examples? I mean, this breath thing seems very lovely, but like, what are some other things we can do to make this tangible into our own lives?
That's a very good question. Nate? Right, okay. That's a very good question. And I guess Dr. Baxter warned that you would be asking that sort of question. I'm convinced. Now what? I do think this is, hospitality is a really important element of Catholic worker philosophy. And it gets, and a brief overview, the Catholic Worker was founded in 1933. Servant of God Dorothy Day, raise your hand if you've heard of her. Okay, good. She was a journalist who converted to Catholicism, grew up, or kind of came of age in sort of leftist socialist newspapers in New York, converted to Catholicism, was trying to find a way to write and use her journalism skills in a way that was in line with her faith. She met Peter Morin, who was a former Christian brother, French intellectual, who was reading all of these encyclicals that the popes were putting out. Pius X's A Supremi Pastor, Pius XI's 1931 40-year celebration of Rerum Novarum, the Catholic social thought that I got a minor in. So all those pieces of, he was reading all of this and he wanted to start a newspaper. He actually first went to Columbia magazine, to the editor of the Knights of Columbus magazine, and asked if he would start it with him. That was a no-go. So he found Dorothy Day through a Commonweal connection. They started this newspaper. And they had a lot of people like you come to the offices of their newspaper and they said, I'm convinced of everything you're writing about. Now what? Now what do we do? It was also the Great Depression. There were no jobs. So young college graduates would come saying, like, I'm reading this paper. I love this thought. They had Jacques Maritain writing. They had Meunier. They had all these great Catholic intellectuals. So, like, what can we do? So that's the Catholic Worker, and so it's kind of grown from there. And there's many different forms and many chapters of its history that we don't have to get into. But that's sort of the basis of it. And I think personalism is a really essential element of it. And a Personalist Manifesto is a really easy read. It's really lovely. It's a great, really manifesto and summary of what personalism is. It's available on the Internet Archive for free. It's out of print in the United States, but it's online for free. And yeah, it's a very, I think, in a place like Benedictine, I hope many of you may take for granted that we live in a personalist society, because I think the best universities act this way, where your dignity and your autonomy and your agency. Meunier talks about that a personalist society is supposed to foster the radical freedom of a vocation, right? That we all have this vocation. And that's why I think it goes perfectly with sort of Balthasar's theodramatic theory and this idea of our disponibilité, or openness to the role that we've been given by the Spirit. It's all about vocation to Meunier, that we have the freedom to pursue our vocation, that everyone's vocation, and it kind of precedes Vatican II Lumen Gentium's articulation of the universal call to holiness, right? There's not like one tier of person whose vocation we should honor and respect and make room for in our society. Every single person has this vocation from God, this dignity of being chosen by God, placed on the stage as an actor. So that's a really, really important element of personalism. And hospitality follows from that, because if every person I meet is this image of God, is this person of great dignity, then, like, I freaking love John Chrysostom. He's so funny. He's just like, okay, you want to walk by this beggar and have someone else take care of them? Look, what if there was gold? You would be like scrambling to pick it up. He's so funny. And so that's what hospitality tries to do, is remind us that the person who's rang our doorbell 5 times today, and it's only 8 a.m., and is looking for sugar because they're in drug-seeking behavior right now, that is Christ. And actually, what Chrysostom's reminding me is I should be running to that doorbell like someone has just dropped off, I don't know, like a birthday present. Like that's the reality. That's reality. Is that how I act? No. Is that what I perceive all the time? No. But that practice of hospitality reminds us that we are the host and they are a guest. And in cultures where hospitality is sort of the order of the day, I think sometimes in the US, hospitality is seen as a chore. It's a chore that we auction off to hotels, or it's like, oh, like, I have to do all this, like, go out of my way to keep my guests entertained, and they're an imposition on me, versus the idea of, like, no, the guest, if you live in a small society and there's no Netflix, a guest is novelty, right? A guest brings news of the outside world. Like, they are the How I Met Your Mother or The Office of your small agrarian society. So if you have a guest, you have the Netflix account, right? So you are super honored, and you're honored to have them, and you will lay out the red carpet for them, and it's slaughter the fatted calf, right? Because, like, that is who the guest is. If your world is very small, a guest is a great gift, which sometimes we forget because we have many distractions and entertainments. So I think this practice of hospitality is one that anyone can practice. And it's one you often begin by practicing with your friends, right? Instead of going out to a bar or to somewhere to eat at a restaurant, like, cook dinner for one another. It begins by that sort of beginning that practice of welcoming people into your home, which is hard if you live in a dorm room, but if you live off campus, a little bit easier. And I think what the Catholic Worker tries to embrace is this sort of biblical hospitality, the hospitality you see in scriptures, this idea that if you entertain strangers, you have entertained angels unaware. And just trying to open up that hospitality to people who, Colin Miller, the author I cited, is a good friend of ours. He runs a Catholic worker house. There are two families that run Morin House in the Twin Cities, which you should definitely look up and go visit. They're so lovely. And they kind of have two separate family houses. One family has 4 kids, one has 5, and they have like a house of hospitality that they run in the middle that has like their chapel where they do vespers. And I remember Colin said once, and like it's good wisdom. He's like, difficult people are used to hearing no, so it's okay to tell them no. But I think it's like hospitality to the difficult people is really important. And you don't have to live at a Catholic worker house to practice that, right? If you pass someone on the street, like it can be very tempting to ignore them. I gotta do something, I'm just gonna not look at anyone. But even those small sort of like, hi, like, how are you? If it leads to some, asking people's names is always a great way to build community. There was a friend of ours who was sleeping in a bus shelter in Harrisburg, and very long story. Very difficult guy, total sweetheart, so smart, just very mentally ill. And the bus company was trying to move him out of the bus shelter because they're like, we need to move this bus shelter. He needs to go. So I called them because he's like, they've been harassing me. So I was like, let me call them. Let's see what we can do. Try to like help Kevin. And so I call this guy and he's like, oh my gosh, like, thank you for calling. I've been like trying to get this guy to move for months. And I was like, oh yeah, like, Kevin told me something. He's like, oh, that's his name? And I was like, dude, you've been talking to this man for months. Like, how did you not start by learning his name, right? Like just that sort of common courtesy of like, I'm Renee, what's your name? And you probably would get a lot more buy-in in terms of solutions if you'd also gotten his name. But I think that's sort of my short answer is like, it's a long answer. But, we begin, how do we kind of free ourselves of the habits of capitalism, which says some people are useful and some people are not. You should invest most of your time talking to the useful and powerful people because they'll be useful to you. How do we break ourselves of that and instead have personalism? I think, hospitality and learning the names of people around you, right? That is a sign of deep respect and dignity. And I don't know if that's a radical answer, but that's the answer, I think.
Hi, thank you for speaking. My name's Zachary.
Zachary, okay.
A couple things, I guess, and I'll try to brief. You had made a comment about when you're acting too much up in your head, or that's the way I'd hear it, and doing the viewpoints to get out of your head, and almost like the body has a knowledge. And I've kind of wondered about that, like how that fits into like a Catholic understanding of like how Thomas Aquinas or somebody like that would talk about my body. But I do experience in theater that there is like, oh, this person came up to me and they're giving me a look like this is dangerous. My body tenses up, even my mind doesn't. Like the body knowledge seems to be a thing. So I'm kind of wondering, do you do both viewpoints and Stanislavski type stuff when you act in order to get at the role in different ways? Do you do that with your students? Like how does that fit in? And I'm not really sure what my other part is. And how do you understand that idea of the body seeming to have a knowledge, almost seeming to have a wisdom, as the concept of a person? And I guess the flip side is, how does theater with hospitality look? Because most of the time I see it as, like we do these shows in special spaces for just certain people. Have you seen theater that includes hospitality for everybody?
That's a good question. For the first question, I'm not a Thomist, so I'm not gonna speak about Thomas. I would not dare. I think I would say yes, like Stanislavski method, viewpoints. These are all tools and exercises, right? They're not I don't know that they're necessarily like a complete vision of how a human person is or could operate in the world. I guess I'm not, when we say, I'm trying to think of, okay, so there are, we do have, Newman's real assent and notional assent, right? So we do have these like different images of like belief coming from this sort of, intuitive or imaginative place versus this sort of notional place, or noetic place. But I guess what I would ask a question of your question in return, which is, yes, I wonder how we could articulate the wisdom of the body in this sort of understanding of the rationality of the human person. Like, perhaps when we talk about the rationality of the human person in a theological category, we're including this sort of wisdom of the body. I don't know. Maybe we're not talking just about sort of brain functioning when we talk about rationality. The little beep boops in our head. So that might be a question for that. In terms of theater in hospitality, or you mean sort of theater among the poor, right? People, among everybody. Yeah, I mean, I think I've never done this, but there are some beautiful, right, projects, theater, like Shakespeare Behind Bars, which does incredible work, right? Like bringing Shakespeare to people who are on the inside in prison, and how these words are freedom. Like these words contain this sort of dignifying element of like, I am the person who can speak these words, and these words are, these words contain a freedom to them. So I would say that could be an example. The second example I think of is one of our friends gave us tickets to, when we were living at a Catholic worker house in Chicago, a friend gave us tickets to the opera at Northwestern. And I'll never forget, we went to see the Magic Flute, and it was I can't remember what the interpretation of, but the staging was doing a lot. It was like doing a lot. And it was a bit much. And our friend John, who's like a saint, just like daily mass goer, always puts $1 in the collection plate, has been homeless for I don't even know how many years, like is 72. He I think I went out to the bathroom at intermission, and he was like sleeping in the couch, and he's like, I can't stand this. And I was just like, that's rage. But we also took someone else who was like saw it, and she was like her first time she'd ever seen anything else like that, and she was just like enchanted by it. But I had to agree with John. It was pretty insufferable. But yeah, I think that's the sort of thing where, beauty is for everyone, and art is for everyone. And that may seem stupid to take someone who doesn't have a house over their heads to see a work of art, but they also, like, even if it's a bad interpretation of the Magic Flute, like, that's still something that, like, we make as a community, as humans, and it belongs to the community, and you don't necessarily need to have a refined, you don't have to, yes, you probably need more education I need more education to understand all the intricacies of opera, but it's sort of the common treasure of the human race. So I think that's a necessity. I believe art is a necessity for everyone. That was a little Facebook sort of activist quote from this talk. But I think that might be how I would answer the hospitality and theater piece.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hello, thank you for speaking tonight. My name is Charlotte.
Sure.
I just curious, what's like one of your favorite roles you've ever played in theater?
I would say 2 right off the top of my head. One is Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, just because it's a great play, it's a great part. It was done outside in the summer in a park, so it was very midsummery. The second was I played Monica in the jeweler's shop at a performance. It was very funky. It was in the First Things office space in New York City. And that's just a really, has anyone read The Jeweler's Shop here by Carol? Okay, yeah. That was a very, I would kind of agree that that's more like Everett says about Shakespeare's late plays, aesthetics over action and vision over plot, but it's just a really beautiful meditation on love. Yeah, good question.
Do you guys mind one more, since that was a short one? A Dr. Mulholland question. You know it will be short.
I think the chuckle in the room tells you that's probably not true. I have a couple of shards of text in my head that have been swimming around since you started speaking. One is, music heard so deeply that it's not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. The other one is directly related to it. You got to lose yourself in the music in the moment. You got to let it go. Very similar text. But for me, I think when you're talking about performing on stage, there's kind of both of those things happening at the same time. The inside to the out, and the outside to the in. And there's almost a hyper-awareness that brings about a lack of awareness. Because if I'm thinking about what's going on at home, or what I have to do the next day, or even if I'm worried about a prop that broke in the last scene, then I'm not going to be fully present in the character. And someone's going to note. If either I'm going to notice, or a fellow actor is going to notice, or the audience is going to notice. So when we carry it over to the Sacramental, because I wasn't thinking, like Zachary was saying about hospitality and theater, I thought you were going somewhere else with it, like hospitality as theater, in the sense that realizing that other people are fellow actors and not props, and therefore I have to be open to them. I have to be open to what they're contributing, because even the smallest person on the list of dramatis personae is important because they bring something. And at the end of the day, as you said, if I am not willing to be at the mercy of reality, I'm never going to experience the reality of mercy. So my question is, the incarnational art that theater is, do you see that as the incarnational art par excellence, and therefore the most liturgical and the most sacramental, or not? It's a yes or no question.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think, well, the short answer is yes. I think theater is, I think theater is the world. There's a reason it sort of captured me at a young age. But I think, to your point about hospitality first, Jacques Derrida says perfect hospitality isn't, I always butcher this word, so correct me, aporia? Yeah, right? It can't exist. So just what you were saying about that sort of surrender to the moment, right? There's a great scholar of the Catholic worker movement, Dr. Harry Murray, he tells he's like, what is the Catholic worker community that has practiced hospitality perfectly? He tells a story of a Catholic worker house that was, they had no rules, they had no locks on the doors, it was very open, it was practicing this sort of like, perhaps what Jacques Derrida would say, perfect hospitality, and then a Harley Davidson gang moved in and put locks on all the doors and kicked everyone out, right? And so perhaps perfect hospitality said is getting kicked out of your own house. But I think the point is that it's not possible. And I think this is kind of getting at Dr. Baxter's question. A lot of theater is about attempting the impossible, right? And that's the point, right? Which I find is pretty much what Christianity is about, if I'm reading the Gospels correctly. It's not that you have all the answers. It's not that you get it right. It is this aporia. It is this sort of like this mystery that you're in. And so I think that is hospitality, and that is theater. And I think this moment, this sort of, it's what actors call it. I was in the moment, right? They come off stage and they're like, I was in the moment, right? Like, I wasn't in the moment. That's the language that we use to describe what it is to have this sort of like ecstasy, right? Of being taken out of yourself and both fully in it. And I think that's what I think you're describing with that beautiful Marshall Mathers quote is this sort of, it's eternity, right? It's for a moment. We are in this eternal moment. And I think that it reminds me of, just thinking of your question, Zachary, too, about the sort of like rational and the wisdom of the body. It reminds me of the C.S. Lewis quote in Paralandra, where it talks about at the zenith of complexity was a simplicity, pellucid, clear, right? This sort of, all of our thinking and all of our striving and all of this work that we put in is just to be there for that moment when eternity breaks in. And I think that's often like hospitality. Like we're very imperfect at welcoming, but sometimes if we do it enough, our heart will be opened a little bit more to receive. So that's my answer.
Thank you very much. Yeah, those of you who are staying for the workshop can just come up here.